morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Nice to see some familiar faces as always. We'll wait for a minute or maybe about a minute for people to start rolling in. Um, but while we do that, I want to thank Saeed for taking the time out of his busy schedule and doing this with us. For those who don't know, Saeed is founder of Embedded Ops, which is a data and rec ops consulting firm based out of London. He has more than a decade of experience in the industry, and now with all of that experience, he helps recruiting firms put their data and their operations in place to unlock next phase of growth. Um, our discussion today is more focused towards analytics and data and how you can use data to um, find friction points in your operations and how you should be looking at data in the first place, right? Like what kind of metrics and things like that, right? So, all right, we have plenty of people, so and they are still pouring in, so we'll just dive right in. Saeed, thank you so much.
Thanks
Um,
for having me.
well, before we, jump into the data and the matrix, right? Since last week or so, right? Like I have, almost every founder that I've spoken to has asked me, hey, what's your view about the industry, right? Like we have a new government, a recently elected new government in UK, a new government coming into US, in January. What do you expect out of 2025?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and equally to everyone who's attending for taking the time to come and listen to us talk. What do I think's coming? I think we're going through a period of the dust settling, certainly here in the UK. I think we need to see how the various changes with the new leadership here impact specifically the staffing industry. I think for our friends over in the States, there seems to be some uptick in economic activity and the stock market. But again, it's all about taking the time. I'm a big fan of keeping my eye on the number of jobs advertised globally by region and by sector. That for me is always one that I like to look at, whether that's weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. I feel like it's just a good, finger in the water about what's happening in our industry and where we're seeing growth versus decline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we come out with this report annually where we kind of summarize, hey, what we are seeing across cohorts of our customers, different segments, different sizes and different geographies, and how they are growing or things like that. So keep an eye out for that. Now, let's dive into our main topic, right? So data and analytics, love it, hate it, you can't really ignore it, right? So um, at what stage do you think, Saeed, right? Like it becomes imperative for a founder to be, very, very data focused and say, hey, my next phase of growth is not going to come from, other things, but going to come from, the way that I look at my data and interpret the health of my business.
Good question. I think the ideal answer is from day one
Yeah.
when it comes to data, in my opinion. When I say data and when we're talking about data, I always think of the two kinds. So like performance data, and then also like your CRM data. So I'm passionate about both, the quality of the people in our database, how coded they are, etc., as well as what can we see, activity ratios, etc., from performance data. So I think from day one, but as they say, the next best time to get started having a data-driven approach to your business and how you're making decisions about growth and where to focus your resources is, if you haven't already, it's today or tomorrow, right? It'd be great if everyone was, but we know that's not the case, especially for some of our entrepreneurial founders who are, in sort of startup micro phases. It's all about getting deals done. I actually still speak to founders today who go by their gut. They know roughly how many times the deal bell has been rung in their office that week, and they're like, right, it's coming. We're going to keep going. But I think adding a layer of data literacy and understanding of your data, performance data specifically, can really help get the most out of your resources and plan for the growth.
Perfect. Okay, so we know when's the right time to start looking at the data. Let's What kind of data, right? Like should a founder be looking at? Right? What kind of so we all know, right? Like the matrix, right? Like, hey, how many submissions are we making per week, or how many calls are we making per week, and what everybody keeps an eye on the final price, right? Like what are we billing? But um, in your opinion, how should you be looking at the matrix that you are tracking right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When it comes to performance data, I would say that we have two types that we can look at. So there are the total number stats and data points that you can look at: how many calls were made, how many minutes were spent on the phone. These are all indicative of effort and application. So that's what I would number one look at to ensure that everyone's working, everyone's doing the hours they should be doing, all the usual stuff. In recruitment, we always talk about, is this a skill issue or a will issue? And these activity markers can help you understand if you've got will issues. But the more qualitative performance data points to look at are things like your ratios. We know typically when folks enter the market, their ratios are worse than when they're 5 years in. You want to become better, your ratio should improve. But I would say that from a quality standpoint, to look at the fact that you're always improving as an agency, I would focus on ratios and looking at reducing those, and then keep an eye on your activity performance data metrics, sorry, like how much time is spent on the phone. I don't think it's a one or the other. I genuinely think that in the modern day that we live in, and the various generations we have to manage within our staffing agencies, I think it's important to look at both. People always say, would you rather be on the top of the call times list, or would you rather be top of the billing board? We all know which one everyone would pick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And typically, one should follow the other. And yeah, that's ideally what you want, right? Like, and one, especially for founders, right? Like you know, one of the founders told me that the reason that she looks at, she's just, a solopreneur, just starting out. The reason that she looks at data is to keep herself honest, right? Like she might feel, hey, I've had a massive week. I've done so much work, right? Like I deserve like, a Friday afternoon off or something like that. And you start looking at the data and you realize, yeah, nope, you did better last week, right? Like, so, get up, go
Y-
hit that. You still gotta hit your numbers, right? So it keeps you honest.
I think I
That
think
way
I
as well.
I think touching on the honesty piece, I think it's a great accountability tool, and I think that we are also in a we live in a world where it's less about, hey, do this because you're told to do this. I think we work in a sector now where consultants, junior folks coming into the industry really understand the business of recruitment, and they're inquisitive and they want to know why. Actually explaining the why around the activity and the output and the result that you should get, and then giving them the data for them to look at themselves. So I'm a big fan of consultants and staff members all having access to their data. Maybe not everything, maybe they don't need to see the P&L for the month, but certainly performance data and their recruitment data that they're looking after is an important one to put in front of them. One of the things we've been saying a lot this sort of back end of the year has been founders will say to me, I want to be better next year. I want to do better next year. I want to grow next year. And then a lot of what I do with folks is benchmark, because you cannot improve what you do not measure. You need to have a starting point from somewhere. So one agency in particular, we've actually looked at the connection between the total time spent on the phone all the way through to money landing in the bank. And we've built the ratio points, connected them the whole way along. For each consultant. So every single consultant, we now know. It gives us the average for the business, so we can make some decisions about where we want to focus efforts, and predict to some extent what deals are likely to be coming in Q1 now, for most people. But from an individual perspective, you put that in front of folks, keeps them accountable, but also it allows us to put together very bespoke training, coaching, mentoring for that consultant, because we can look at it as an isolated set of data and go, this is where the quality is not quite there, or this is where you need to apply yourself a little bit more. We can really, really infer a lot from that data.
Makes
Accountability
sense.
through
So
data is great.
no, that's, I think, a very good point, right? Like, so let's say, I'm a founder, who has always gone by the gut. I want to start, at least get to the first level of, being data driven, right? Like, without overwhelming myself with things that, that might be more complex. What are some of the key, maybe let's say top 3 or 4 metrics that I should start tracking today?
Okay, I would 100% track time on the phone. That is just one outside of your CRM that I would always recommend that you're tracking. The more conversations we have, the more information we gather, the more relationships we build, the more we can hone our skills in and sharpen our tools, as they say. So for sure, I would say that we have to start with that as a metric. And then what I would look at is the CV sent to first interview ratio. I think that is a really, really important one to look at, because it not only shows that you're getting pipeline. In my terms, pipeline is people at interview stages and beyond. But it also shows that you've done your business development part of the recruitment cycle really well. You've taken a good job briefing, you've understood what the client wants, and you've managed to achieve as close to one-to-one interview ratio as possible. The other one that I like to look at is the offer to placement. I think that one really, really, really shows your skill and ability to manage candidates through the process. I always say to junior folks, the job isn't to just book interviews and arrange interviews. The idea is that we're going to get an offer at the end, hopefully multiple offers from different clients, and hopefully get them to accept and close on one of those offers. So your ability to close all of your offers to placements not only is great because it's an invoice out the door, but it just shows how good you've been through all of the previous interactions with the candidate to almost ensure or feel confident that you're going to close them out. So all the classic stuff comes into play there, soft closing, force ranking other opportunities, playing out lots of scenarios, asking all the difficult questions that no one wants to hear the answer to. Like, would you take a counter offer? The little things like that. So for me, I would say the 3 would be total time on the phone. Like, how much relationship building are we doing? Either total time on the phone, or maybe we could look at total time spent in front of customers as well in terms of meetings. But that relationship building activity there, Stevie's first interview, offer to placement. That's probably the 2 ends of the funnel, which would show you the quality in your BD as well as your candidate management.
Perfect. Okay, so let's say now let's graduate this a little bit, right? Like, I've been doing this for a year. I know these ratios, right? Like that we just mentioned. However, now I want to get to the next phase, right? Like, where um, you know, um, how do the metrics that I'm tracking change, right? Like, let's say I'm running a firm that makes $2 million in revenue, have 10 people, 10, consultants, and 2 team leads and things like that. How do my metrics change?
Good question. I think the importance of being on top of your data, and there's an argument for each of the different types of businesses for it to be super important. When you're a small business, every bit of effort matters and counts. So therefore, you want to know that that's being spent in the right place, doing the right things, getting the results that you want to achieve. And then equally, when you become a larger organization and you are actually spending loads of money, your cost base is higher, and actually you need to drive an ROI from the spend that you've got in the form of staff, etc. What metrics changed for me? I think for as you get much larger and have a much more established sales floor, i.e., experienced people that should, you've had the proof of concept, you know that they can do deals, you know that they can bill. It's probably going to be looking at, their average billings, and
Mhm.
things like time to profitability. A lot of folks track things like, the time to doing the first deal for a recruitment consultant when they enter the industry. I much prefer time to profitability, looking at that person as a sales head and the revenue generating function that they're meant to be in. So looking at how quickly we get people profitable. Um, that's probably the most significant change that you have. I think at the front end, it's all very, when you're new, you're smaller, it's all very raw, it's quite emotional. A lot of it, you've got to make decisions off of what you're seeing in front of you. And if there's only five of you in an office, everything feels a bit personal. But as you get bigger, I think you have the ability with a bit of distance, to look at the data probably in a little bit more of a black and white fashion.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So now let's kind of change gears a little bit, right? Like, so let's say I've set up my data tracking. I'm now tracking all of this data. I'm going to take a fictitious example of, let's say, I have a team of five consultants, right? So five recruiters. Um, they are doing their thing. Now, and I have set up, all the different metrics that we just discussed. Now, the problem comes that, okay, I'm not really a data person, right? Like, how do I read this data to decide, you know what should I do, right? Like, how do I make my people better? How do I make this a healthier, better, faster growing business, right? Like, how do I do that?
Yeah, okay, good point. So I would always say that you need to start at the front of the funnel. So at the front of the workflow. So we're looking at activity. So maybe we're looking at the time on the phone. If I have a recruitment agency, if I've got five folks and they are all spending hours and hours a day on the phone, but actually we're not seeing, let's say, for example, CVs getting sent to clients or no jobs are coming on board, immediately to me that screams we're speaking to the wrong people or we're saying the wrong things. So most of the time between most of these data points or metric points or ratios, whatever you'd like to call them, between the two there's usually one or two things that you can usually almost bet your house on that it's going to be. So loads of time on the phone, but not getting the desired result of CVs sent out the door or new jobs on. Who are we speaking to and what are we saying? And that's what I'd focus on. So utilize call recordings, do practice pitching practice. No one likes listening to call recordings. No one likes doing role plays, but honestly, I still think to this day it might be what I feel is the most qualitative form of training because it's real life, it's on your feet, you've got to think about it. And it's important to hear ourselves back because the same principle, you can't improve what you don't measure. So go and benchmark yourself and listen. Some of the other ones that we could talk about is you're sending loads of CVs, but you're not getting interviews. You're probably sending the wrong profile. But what's the reason for sending the wrong profiles or wrong skill set? It might be a qualification issue on the role. Did we actually qualify it enough? It's also completely fine to go and requalify roles. I actually think clients are more receptive to requalification calls now than they ever were. Back in the day, you would get on a role briefing call with 20 other agencies and one hiring manager talking at 20 agencies about the same stuff. And you could ask one or two questions, but that was it. So requalify the role, make sure you're on the right track. If someone is not necessarily is still not qualifying the candidates quite correctly or introducing them in a way that highlights why they are suitable for the role, you can work on their ability to write a write-up. We should never send anything out that says, oh, here's a candidate with 5 years experience in X, Y, and Z. That's just lazy and it's just not very good, right? And it's what everyone, all the rubbish recruiters are probably sending. We know they've got 5 years experience because we can see it on their CV. What are you going to put in that write-up that you have learned about this candidate through your human interaction with them that makes them a standout candidate versus what the client's looking for? So those are examples, but I would say that through all of the ratio points, there is some clear and obvious things to go and address and look at, a little checklist, if you will. If anyone wants to talk about any of those ratio points and stuff like that, I'm always happy to have a 10-15 minute chat or half an hour if you need it to talk about what could be wrong in some of those ratios and what to do to improve them. But yeah, like if you want to improve, that you'd look at each ratio in isolation. You'd start at the front of the funnel to make sure actually we're speaking to the right people, we're saying the right things to get the results we want, and work your way down. So CV, interview, offer, placement, invoice paid.
Perfect. Now, I get this question a lot, so I'm just going to ask it right away, right? Like, what's the benchmark for submitter to interview ratio, right? Like we've seen a very wide variance amongst our customers. And I get this question a lot, right? Like, and even in the same team, we see a massive amount of variation, right? Like we see people, submitting 30 candidates just to get 6 interviews, and we've seen people submitting 10 candidates to get 6 interviews, right? Like, and both end up having pretty much the same revenue numbers, right? Like, so now, if I, as a founder, right, like what kind of benchmarks should I be targeting? Or is there an algorithm that I should follow, right? Like this is the benchmark. This is where I want everybody to be.
Yeah,
Because I can't expect everybody to be my top recruiter, right? Like that's
no,
just not
no.
feasible.
Do you know what, man? And I get asked this question all the time, always. And I always feel like such a politician when I say, well, it's different for every agency. But genuinely, the answer is that different industries are going to command different ratios or optimal ratios. For example, if you work in a super candidate short market where there is a real demand for specific niche skills, you would want your interview ratio to be 1-to-1 because you would want to be making sure that if you think you're in that niche of a market, you should generate a 1-to-1 interview. I do work with a Nordic tech recruitment agency, and they're close to 1-to-1, which is amazing for their sector. But yeah, the short answer is it really depends on your industry. The one thing I would say internally when looking at your own sales floor is try to avoid having the same expectations on ratios with different staff members, especially if they're working different desks and different roles, but even more so if they've got different levels of experience. You might want to set like, the pinnacle or the ratio to strive for as your best performers ratios because they're your most skilled person, most revenue generating, the person that's done it the longest and has the most knowledge. You might want to set them as the benchmark, as the target to try and get to, but certainly don't be setting that as the target for someone that's doing something different or just joined the industry. But it's so funny you asked that
Makes
question because
sense.
I was at a networking drinks last night, and in the pub, we were talking about there was a guy that worked at an agency, and he just did not like to do business development. Absolutely hated doing business development. So he'd pick up a job, and we all know best practice is that we grade our jobs, right? We should always look at our jobs and go, is this an A grade, B grade, C grade? How much time should I put into it, etc. Anyway, this guy would not grade anything because he just didn't want to do BD. He had a job and he would work that job until like it was gone and they pulled it away. He sent 76 CVs to this one job and it didn't go anywhere.
Wow.
And everyone was like, just go and do some more business development. If you're sending 76 CVs to a job and not getting a placement, there's something seriously wrong here. But yeah, as
Yeah,
soon
I
as you
think after the 10th one, the hiring manager has just stopped looking at his CVs.
and 100%, I
Yeah.
reckon you'd be in the junk folder, definitely.
Yeah. I can imagine that, right? Like, no, that's fantastic. Um, One question, right? Like, and I like to ask this to almost all of our webinar guests, right? Like, let's say I'm at zero right now. I start doing this, right? Like, how soon can I start expecting results, right? Like, because let's say I start tracking data, I start being more data driven. That's going to come at the cost of something, right? Like, there is always a cost, monetary, time, effort, focus, whatever it is, right? Like, and it needs to be positive ROI for me, right? Like, when can I start expecting results out of being more data driven, right? Like, what have you seen typically, right? Like, and what are some of the pitfalls, right? Like, that I should be on the lookout for, right? Like, you helped a lot of
Yeah.
founders go through this journey. What are typical mistakes that people make, and
Yeah.
that just makes them go back to the zero.
I will tell you some of the don'ts for sure. Whatever you do, do not obsess and spend every day looking at metrics and ratios and numbers. The job is still, as a founder, your job, if you're a billing founder, your job is to do deals, to inspire the people around you, to manage the people around you, to do the job. So do not become a data analyst in overnight. That's not what you're there to do. Do not track too many. That is, do not track too many. Do not then also try and improve too many. Small, little, often is the way to focus when it comes to trying to improve data. So what I would do is I would have hopefully you have the ability to pull the data nicely. And if you can, then set yourself 30 minutes of reviewing last week's data or this week's data. So I personally like to look at performance data on a Friday, just because I am quite weird. And over the weekend, I'll be thinking about work, and sometimes, things will come into my head, and it gives me a few days to think of ways to try and solve some of the data issues I can see through the data. And then on a Monday, I'll set out a plan. These are the three things we're going to do to improve these ratios. This is the outcome we want. Small changes in behavior to move the needle on the ratio, and then track it. So this is why we did this, to achieve this, and I'm going to review it again on Friday or on Monday, and that's how I do it. So do not get obsessed. Do not have the ratios in front of you all day long. They're not going to change if you stare at them. Just come up with the small things to change, implement them, track whether it works. So an hour at most is what I would recommend folks are spending on that. So half hour to review, half hour to plan. And then the rest of the week you implement it for your usual management tactics. And in terms of like ROI, I see folks feeling the improvement the same afternoon that they start thinking about the data, because thinking about the data has led them to think about the activity that they're doing, and actually thinking about the activity that they're doing and trying to do something different has led to different results or better results. And so people can
Right.
immediately feel the benefits of it. But certainly over the long term, you will 100% feel better for it. And the numbers will show you it.
Yeah. Another, I think I would like to add one more thing to it, right? Like, what I have seen is a lot of times, people make conclusions, especially about performance data, on very short time periods, right? Like, so let's say I have five people. I see, my person A has, I look at it over last 2 weeks, and person B has done way better than person A. Doesn't really mean anything, right? Like, anybody, no matter how good you are, can have a off week or off 2 weeks. You can have maybe a
100%.
bad luck streak of a month. But if it
Yeah.
happens over a quarter, or even better, like if it happens over two consecutive quarters,
Yeah.
that's when you can make very solid conclusions, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes, it's just matter of, maybe coaching a little bit, making small changes, and you see dramatic improvements. But like, yeah, making conclusions, looking at very short period of data is and not just performance, right? Like, pretty much anything,
Yeah.
any metric can go up or down just by sheer chance. But there is in statistics, we have this concept called regression to the mean, right? Like, give it
Mhm.
long enough period, and you will know what that actual mean or what that actual
Yeah.
average is. And but yeah, so another mistake. So I see a hand raised. So I'm sorry, I forgot to make this housekeeping announcement. We have a Q&A section. So if you have any questions, just put it in the Q&A section of your Zoom window. In just about I have a couple of questions that I want to go through, but in about next 5 minutes, we'll start a Q&A session if you have any questions at all, right? So, fantastic. Now, um, do you work with a lot of different kind of businesses, right? Like, tell us some war stories, right? Like that
Mhm.
you've gone through, right? Like, and I'm sure, right? Like when you go in and try and implement some of these data-driven things,
Yeah.
especially for slightly more mature orgs, let's say you have of 2 or 3 managers, and each person is managing 4 or 5 people. There is resistance to change. How do you deal
Well,
with that?
yeah, I mean, try and make it as less with try and have the journey have as least friction as possible. So try and not to change or like, revolutionize the way of working and how we do things. If I'm honest, it really comes down to having a champion, a leadership champion. You can't impact this change unless it's being led and driven by founders and leaders, and you need a few champions in the middle management, a few champions on the sales floor as well that are going to be good ambassadors for this change. Ambassadors for change, not enemy of progress. If anyone ever acts like that, I'm always very quick to highlight that they're being a bit of an enemy of progress. But the education, tying it back to what people's motivations are. Recruiters are mostly recruiters because they want to make money. We're essentially salespeople. We want to do deals. We want to earn commission. So actually, why would you not want to change your way of working by a tiny bit to then potentially make this much more money and be better and quicker at doing it? So I think it's having founder buy-in and making sure that they're coming along that journey with you, having some champions internally at various different levels, and education. Educating folks as to why this is important, why this will help them in their career goals. Horror stories. We've we started tracking lots of metrics at one agency, different metrics to different teams. One was a temp desk, one was a perm contingent desk, and there was a real push for having more conversations on the phone, with a view
Right.
to generating more market intelligence. And then one young chap thought it would be okay to just call his friend and have the headsets on and walk around and stuff like that. But what I know that these things happen, right? And unfortunately they do happen more often than you think. But all of a sudden we had the same number being called 4 times a day, every day for a month. It was like, it didn't belong to a client. And when we were looking at our telephony reporting, the number wasn't attached to a contact record or a candidate record. So it was very, very obvious. You just had to have a call. I actually found it quite funny having that conversation with him. He's like,
Yeah, yeah. That's a
what
fun
can you
one.
do? That's a fun one. It's okay. But yeah, I mean, there, there's always going to be the odd person that tries to, break the system and cheat the system. It's some people will say those are the people that innovate in our world. They try and break systems and break ways of doing it. But yeah, that was just one example. But there's another chap. There's another chap again who we were really pushing for qualification calls. Like, you're not speaking to enough candidates in your candidate short market. You need to get, why don't you go to market with some new messaging? And they've used an automation product to do their email sequencing. It's quite a robust bit of email sequencing kit. It's more a marketing software than it is a desk level consultant tool, and they have forgotten to use a suppression list. And so they've ended up emailing candidates that are in process for other roles for their colleagues, some of which were at offer stages for, potentially six-figure deals. And then all of a sudden, we're putting deals at risk because we've applied pressure for an activity to get a result, but it's just not been managed quite well
Yeah,
enough, and the understanding wasn't there. So yeah, horror stories are plenty. Recruitment as an industry, I think, has more in it than than others.
yeah.
But you just learn and move and evolve, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So one thing, since you mentioned about end-to-end analytics, right? Like you want to measure right from, hey, how many sales calls am I making all the way to like that's the first, that's the genesis of, let's say, your sales activity all the way till billing, right? Like, and I want to show our viewers something, right? Like since Saeed mentioned this, we are coming out with a very exciting Recruiter Flow Business Intelligence or Recruiter Flow BI feature. It's not out yet right now. It's just me and a couple of other folks internally who have access to this. But let me just quickly show that to you. So here, what I've done is for all the users, right, like in this dummy account, I'm just showing, right, like, hey, give me how many sales calls they're making, how many, then in the first column, second column, how many submissions, third column, how many offers, fourth column, how many placements, and fifth column, the revenue build, right? Like, and right now it's just totals, but you will be able to, instead of totals, you can toggle to ratios to all of this as well, right? So, and so this is something that's coming out very, very soon, definitely before the end of the year. So keep an eye out. I couldn't resist, little bit of, giving a little bit of a sneak peek into what we are building. Um,
But for your customers, and we talked about a starting point. That is a great starting point. Just pick 2 to 3 like data points that you want to look at the relationship between. Build something like that. That's your half an hour at the end of the week, half an hour at the beginning of the week. Plan how you're going to improve those metrics and those ratios. So that's a nice
yeah,
way of doing
no,
it because you can custom build it specifically rather than having the full view. So yeah, nice.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you want to have all of this in one place, right? Like if you have to switch screens, or you have to switch different tabs and download data into like a couple of Excel sheets and then merge them together, yeah, it's not happening, right? Like then that's like a full 3 hour operation. If you are an Excel expert, yeah, it's just not happening, right? Like so that's why we came up with this, right? Like, hey, pick any metric that you want, whatever ratio that you want, counts, averages, and yeah, build whatever report that you want. Right now we are working on adding visualizations to this, right? Like, so instead of a boring old table, if you want like hey, show me a pie chart or a bar graph, or things like that, you can pick whatever visualizations that you want as well.
LinkedIn data as well. Lots of people are spending a lot of money on LinkedIn as a product, whether that's Sales Nav or Recruiter Lite or Recruiter full Recruiter package. There's lots of reporting capabilities in there as well. It's a big tool. It's usually a big expense for most agencies. Definitely make sure that you guys are pulling out your usage reports for this year. And if anybody is wondering, oh, is this good usage, poor usage? Just forward it on to me. If you don't know how to pull it, I do have a how-to guide for that. I know, Manan, we were speaking beforehand of anything that I've got that would be useful. I have the full how-to guide on how to pull and format that Excel export of LinkedIn usage. Like, it's coming to the end of the year. Let's, should be on top of all of our planning, looking at all of our tool ROI. No better time to be doing something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on LinkedIn data, right? Like one of the things that we do for our customers is essentially keep your data fresh, right? Like it's a big challenge, right? Like you have a database of tens of thousands of people, this data gets old, and then your consultants, confidence in your own data decreases because, hey, this candidate was updated or added 2 years back, right? Like in fast moving industries like tech, right? Like that means they probably have changed 2 jobs already, right? Like, so,
Yeah, usually.
yeah, so what we essentially do is run continuous data refreshes. So if anybody changes their job or job title or anything on LinkedIn, it automatically reflects on Recruiter Flow. If you don't know how to do that and you're a Recruiter Flow customer, just talk to support and they'll give you an idea on how you can get that done. This has been a wonderful session. Thank you so much for your time, Saeed. It's already getting dark
Yeah,
over
I
there
told
in
you. I
London.
told you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, now good luck with the winter.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for attending.